Alright, and good morrow. Doing what I can here to shelter from the rain. The grade of equipment is meant to be good enough, but in a moment I'll move my mouth further from the mic and talk a bit more normally. Possibly go find a place where I can actually record and not get too rained on. Alrighty. Well, good morrow. Welcome to my informal walk and talks. I like these to be a place where I can collate my thoughts of the tech news from the world as I scourge it. And I do a purposeful video that isn't these morning walk and talks. I like them to remain on topic. Usually thematically I'll introduce, say, one consumer bargain in the process of discovering a topic that people might come to the video for, being that would be what the heading is. I like to educate a consumer. And the nature of handing over consumer bargains is people often don't know that they need them or want them until they're being offered one. And of course you don't want to come across as trying to sell anyone anything, because that's an instant disconnect. So it's very hard to manage. I want to say a double edge there. I do like to temper my channel a bit. I like to start with long lead-ins and human discussion, no edits, just so people know that I'm not artificial intelligence, that I'm accidental. What's the opposite of intelligence? Something social and emotional. And I'm a human being, I guess. I'm fallible. It's my greatest traits. For example, today's talk, my motivation for getting out of bed a little bit earlier than coffee time, which is my normal motivator. When you don't feel motivated, and yet it's a duty and service to others that makes it happen. Well, that's me, like every day. So I really enjoy these walk and talks. People might think that I'm just recording while I do my morning walk, but it's actually that it's the other way around, in that I go for the walk so I can do a morning recording. So what could possibly get me out of bed on a day like today? The weather's just... what was the old Leisure Suit Larry postcard? The weather is here, wish you were beautiful. That was a corker in the late 80s. I tell you, I want to put my foot in my mouth firmly on this one. And it's not that I want to be breaking news. Well, it's not that I want to be the first out the door with something, and therefore will risk irresponsible journalism. Right, like I'm walking head into the rain here. Nice camera equipment for once. Fairly confident the lens has a level of water resistance, hence I've got it already covered in water. The body, consumer class nonsense. Anyway, apologies, because I set the mic for a level where I hold the camera a solid couple of feet from my face, not centimetres, which is as good as I can do if I'm giving up my hat as a rain shield in the hope that I can do more than just one video. Now, let's just assume this video doesn't crack the internet, doesn't get me known, doesn't get me supported in a way that allows me to be an independent journalist, which, it's not my dream. If it goes with my hobby and costs me nothing arguably to do it, well, hiring some artists, maybe a cameraman, we wouldn't have this issue. I've been willing to hold the microphone on a set if it helps getting the work done, but that's more under the ethic of all hands on deck. So, look, I can see a destination where I can actually record safely. I might start. My thoughts can now actually wander. Rather than being defense mode, safety, protecting, right? And I'm kind of protecting my family by protecting the equipment, because I don't want to have to rebuy equipment. So thank you for learning a little bit about me. But But I'm so broke that as a journalist, I almost come across as being able to be bought, even though the whole point of my channel as a conscientious consumer is not that. It's really not that. Oh, it's such a shame. I really wanted to go to nice locations where I could change my focus points, draw people's eyes as I'm talking. All right, so look, I've certainly achieved what I wanted to do with a long lead in. We've lost the stragglers along the way. Anyone that needs a juicy heading has moved along, and I don't want to put this in the heading. I really don't, which means anyone else, if it becomes newsworthy months from now, will run with it. Someone might remember they heard it here first. PlayStation 6, right? I don't know anything more about it than anyone else. But they're going to use HBM, high bandwidth memory. I'm a big fan of high bandwidth memory. A little Fury card. And in the walk and talks, I make things a bit personal into myself. And I'm kind of doing a more succinct video on a topic. I don't talk about myself and my own possessions because that's not what people come along to hear. So, a little bit confused here because I think I've got the news that could break the internet. Hence getting out of bed this morning and running up the top of the hill. Well, walking with a hat shielding my camera. High bandwidth memory. They're also talking about like a 3D V cache. Now I understand that can work at a chip level, but run with this for a second, all right? High bandwidth memory is amazing, very, very fast. And my little 4 gigabyte Fury held its own at a time when all the other cards had moved on to 8 gigabytes of memory plus. It's such fast memory. If you could feed it, well, not that games were PlayStation 5 ports that were expecting a fast drive, and games could be written from the ground up on the basis that it was there, right? So all games had to lean on your page file, and they had to lean on the fact that at no point was memory really going to be required at a certain speed, arguably. Well, they could. They had to set the limit, the ballpark, really low on that one. It wasn't anything amazing. But a future console, and arguably a handheld release between now and then, which might allow the developers to get a handle on the future technology without anybody expecting anything from it, because it would still be tiered at achieving PlayStation 5 level performance in a portable, is HBM. If the 3D V cache wasn't a standard AMD technology of, say, extra cache on the main board, right? But if they were using the patents, right, because specifically 3D V cache, I don't know, that to me, that almost became a Samsung patent, didn't it? Single level cell, multi-level cell, and it's like, yeah, let's start branding it, right? Because if you can't brand a number, for example, 8086, 286, 386, 486. No, we've got competitors now. Pentium. So, what would happen if you could apply a compression algorithm like 3D V cache into high bandwidth memory? Right, now the big problem with high bandwidth memory was the limitations, and that they couldn't go past 4 gigabytes when in those first releases without it was a nightmare. So let's just say that they've cracked 8, right? Even if they've cracked 8, that doesn't allow them backwards compatibility with a PlayStation 5 that might have 16. But if you can stack memory, right, now let's just work with the portable. Maybe they try to achieve it on 4, right? They need a certain level of compression to be able to achieve what the PlayStation console has, the home console at this present time in the market. They might go with 6, right? Two that isn't using any cache for the operating system, just to get them out of trouble, just to have them with a product that can launch. And that can be just like the current PlayStation configuration where they've got, and the Pro, where they've got 2 gig separate to the main RAM, and it runs at a different speed, right? So they could do that in the portable. They could have 4 of this high bandwidth memory, HBM, and then 2, a slower style, which is used for the operating system. It could remain filled without having to, use any pipes, try to move data around when people hit the home button, so to speak. So, stacking. does that then mean they could give up a little bit of their speed? Knowing Sony's genius, it'd be an off-chip to the central processing unit. It'd be an accelerated processor, although I doubt it. I think it would be on the main chip in the PlayStation 6. Partly because we've gone past the point of needing more CPU speed, arguably. We've now got enough that to add any more just forces developers to have to try to hoodwink levels of AI and levels of, beyond bone mapping and stuff in some other platforms like virtual reality. There's not necessarily a need for more CPU, because what we do in, say, a mobile phone, the Meta, right, the XR2 Snapdragon chipset, is that you would think they would have that 8-core processor handling all sorts of the VR functions. But if you're on a portable chipset that can do ray tracing, and you want all of that silicon, all that raw power to be used to games so they can be cutting edge, you'd more than happily use off-chip processors to do acceleration or your tracking of controllers or the movements and all sorts of stuff. It just helps. It frees up the main processor to use its power performing, it saves states if it's trying to power sip, or more importantly, to be able to flog all the processors out if that's the design. But in a PlayStation Future Portable / PS6, and so I'm just lumping them together at the moment, right? And I'm probably quite wrong. For all the things I could be wrong about, there's probably 4 concepts I'm running with in this video that they all will work together, i.e. there's a potential they're right. Or, individually, some of them might be wrong, but the theme or the theory of stacking an HBM memory, allowing a manufacturer to actually bring a product to market because they can achieve needs of backwards compatibility or compatibility with existing products and use a reasonably, what is considered a small amount of memory, but is also considered a large amount of high bandwidth memory, right? So traditionally, the long lead here, which I could have skipped, is that it's like use high bandwidth memory is known historically to have very limited or very small pools of available space. So, assuming that assuming there's no breakthroughs that aren't needed, or like the length of the distance from the CPU to the memory modules can all make a difference. If you're trying to do a portable unit, it comes down to power levels, which this is where things get a little bit like, you don't want to go off chip with too many extra chips, and so you put the work on the CPU. Probably the way. Right, see how I evolve my thoughts even as I do these videos. I have an idea that I just run with it. It's all fun. It's all fun and games until Sony's next generation of ideas is cracked too early, that the competitor can actually bring something to market that is equal to it. Or what they typically need to do is not have the competitor aware of how much of a threat they are, and they'll be able to get out the gate. And so having lame specs as confirmed by people that are building the systems go, it's only launching with 8 gig of RAM or 4 gig of RAM, and everyone's like, cool, they're going to have to re-engineer their entire software architecture, software library just to fit. They're not planning on doing like native compatibility with it, like the texture size and everything on other devices just demands too much. But none of that is of course true if you're stacking. But they need the speed of the HBM for AI, for their super sampling method, right? They learnt so much in the process of making PSSR coming to market. And whilst they were able to repurpose some of the cache on the chip to assist, right? Cache functions that should have been potentially used for other things that should be, assisting maybe the compute units or some such. But because of the speed that they're running at, being able to, at a low level, or the small off-screen render version, the first level assessments, if you will, where they're trying to really gain their advantages in terms of figuring out what's got to be done for this particular frame, setting it up, or the frame before it and the frame after it, and therefore the frames in between it. I don't know. Could be anything. Let's not talk about the nature of the software, arguably, it's going to use the hardware. But with stacked memory, it will allow them to configure for backwards compatibility in such a way that they're compatible with the old method, which was large amounts of RAM. Because as they go into the future methods, if developers were to totally lean on the PlayStation ecosystem, which they've pretty much got right now, like they own the market. And I say this as someone who uses PC VR. It's horrible. Alien Rogue Incursion on the PlayStation 5 just owns the PC version, right? And people say, oh, it's lacking optimization in the PC space. No, there's a whole bunch of platform jank in the PC space holding back people's machines, right? Which, if anything, kind of forces people onto consoles. And Xbox has nothing to compete, hence all of a sudden Microsoft pretending to play nice and like, here's Prey and HDR and ultra-wide, and yeah, PCs are relevant again, except here's the 24-second half update that for Windows 11 that buries Windows mixed reality headsets, because we don't want VR. We don't want people who buy briefly into high-end PC platforms to get a taste for VR, because people generally don't come back, right? So if we look at this concept of stacking memory and what its needs will be, one of them will be HBM's limit, holding back the total size that you can use, which will kind of stop backwards compatibility, unless you can compress and make that data more, right? So the 4 times compression level, 4 would become 16, which would make it compatible with the existing console, especially if you've got 2 gig of off-chip RAM that runs at a slower speed that can be used to keep the operating system in it. But what about when you've got the needs for the AI, the upsampling tech for the screen, right? That needs speed. And so you assign the level of compression, right? You lop off any chips that you need and the size of the buffer that you need. You can just change more or less on the fly. That's how consoles have worked for the last, while in history. These reassignable memory pools. Microsoft uses it for anti-competitive reasons. Here I am always putting the boot in, right? This is how angry they make me feel. And this is the point of these videos. It's partly their therapy, maybe. Maybe these thoughts just come to the top of my head because I haven't done enough Scientology clearing. Right? I've never done any Scientology clearing, but I should. I know it, right? There's anyone that just scratches the surface on something out there as a technology that's available to me as a person. I know it's out there. I know I should be using it. Right? It's probably how most Windows users feel towards Apple or Linux. Anyway, wouldn't it be great? So they could compress 4 gigabytes as needed on the fly. And unlike DirectX 12, which has really only been used to make the texture size 1 gigabyte larger than traditional PC video cards and then encrypt the game data. Why? I don't know, right? In an offline game, right? Like Forza Horizon 3, right? If we encrypt the textures with a texture file it's a gigabyte larger than anyone's video RAM on any of their GPUs, we can force the CPU to constantly have to do decryption of the game world data, which can actually bog a processor down, irrelevant of how much more speed a CPU has when you're up against the Scorpio hardware, right? PCs had ridiculously higher amounts of CPU power. And so you had to find ways to curtail the PC. The best way to do that was to make the primary core, which was responsible for the game's minimum frame rate, also responsible for constantly decrypting textures. Now, I did find a way around that. You'll find the first video on this channel, if you care to learn, was me figuring out how to get around that, which was basically just set a huge page file and then drive around the map for long enough that finally the game had decrypted its entire texture onto the drive such that you could then load it without the CPU hit. I think the first part of that video also said, look, first and foremost, disable Core 0, set program affinity to ultra low, all the opposites of what you generally want to do to get more performance out of a machine is what it takes to hack a Windows PC and make it performant. It feels like what I'm doing with VR at the moment. I've almost got to put it in safe mode. I've got to run a particular set of drivers, which I think is catching everyone out because Windows Update has moved people forward. And so dual GPU users on laptops that have an AMD primary chipset can't figure out why their NVIDIA card is working poorly. And it just turns out that Steam VR has got this 100 megabytes a second memory leak when motion smoothing's engaged. And it's just ridiculous, right? So it doesn't affect everyone. I mean, that's how Microsoft they've learnt to hoodwink. You can't affect everyone because then they get caught out. It gets traced back to them and they have to fix it. But if you only affect small groups of people at any given time, but constantly make the platform so janky and so horrible that nobody can outright beat it or outright call them out for it at any given moment, they get away with it. So people are learning, right? So PlayStation 6 will be relevant to gamers everywhere. It'll be the last good hardware platform if it comes out. If we survive, whatever it is that the lizard people or the things that are flying around above us, which probably could be the lizard people, who knows? It could just be, the lizard-minded government agencies that feel that they have to work through fear and control and have a unified light show ready to break down all the world's religions and make us all go, oh, look, we're being invaded by ships built by, terrestrials, but we're calling them ETs. And therefore, we all unify and we all put our money uphill to the war machine, which allows one culture. The same way it's aligned with Xbox, hence why all the press partners get on board with selling Xbox nonsense, right from the dishonourable Western house, right? All their media is just lies, and damn lies and statistics, whereas the East are kind of honourable, right? And you might catch them out occasionally if you're doing something that's a bit dodgy, but usually it's just oversights and mistakes, right? Sony legitimately don't pay their software teams to do the most basic of things, hence the 25th year anniversary of their equipment, 30 year anniversary of PlayStation's launch, right? The software front end tweaks were actually done by volunteers in their teams making that sort of stuff happen. I think it was a project actually that they ran, a little contest internally, and the best ideas that looked like they could be made with the smallest amount of extra effort were then brought about. But neither here nor there. To a future PlayStation 6, which might be our last best place to play games. If you haven't discovered the greatness that is PlayStation 5 Pro, which is seriously great. Like, it smashes out PCs. Nothing yet really shows it, but as someone that's always bought high-end video cards and sees what you get from an improvement from one card to the next, you get that absolutely in the PS5 Pro, on top of the fact that you get like what is effectively a triple-size drive. Because Sony have put performance chips in there and Microsoft just opted for consumers are easily misled and we can use budget chips and more of them. So PlayStation's 800 gig becomes Xbox's 1000 gig, and we don't see it in software titles in all the aligned with Xbox camp, because they're quite happy to choose a file format that doesn't benefit the PlayStation, and then choose a file size that doesn't benefit either SSD, and then zip the file such that after you finish loading it, you've then got to do a final CPU decompression again, another decompression potentially, and lean on the CPU, which if you've got 100 megahertz advantage on the Xbox size, you can squeeze near equal load times, right? Like the opposite of optimization, what we call de-optimization. But if enough studios do it, then people forget that the Sony has an advantage until second wave and third wave software titles come out on the Sony side, where all of a sudden the one Xbox game that has like sound essentially ray tracing, but the cool feature that Tempest does on the PlayStation, right? Before you output it in Dolby Atmos or DTSX or whatever your output renderer is, what the Sony's doing with Tempest is actually hundreds of hardware channels of sound bouncing around the environment. Anyway, that is a huge CPU hit. Our audio accelerators in the 90s, our sound cards, they didn't accelerate per se. They did a lot more function, but they sometimes cost a few CPU cycles to use them, and they became very unattractive to gamers that were just after more frame rate. We're willing to put additional hardware in the machine if it netted them more frame rate, right? But they didn't understand that what happens in a console, well, you didn't need to understand in the 90s. But now, when you put together a cutting-edge console and you put a bunch of accelerators in it, off chip, or things that take away the need for the CPU to do these core functions, things like Tempest really pushes the industry forward. So if you've got a whole bunch of things like, well, now they've got ray tracing off the chip, right? They don't have to burn through their compute units. They don't have to give up a lot of the CPU cycles to assist with complex ray tracing, like most of the early titles did when trying to hoodwink a feature in, because it was a market bullet point. Right, manipulations, lies, damn lies, and statistics, and how the market goes on media. But yeah, you get ray tracing shoehorned in, and you're using the CPU. So people don't acknowledge that the PS5 Pro actually does have a more powerful CPU on the simple basis that now it's got a huge amount of off-chip real ray tracing capability. And so for the Pro titles that are obviously going to have ray tracing, not needing to lean so heavy on the CPU to do that effect naturally gives them ray tracing, a CPU bump. Anyway, look, this is the problem of my morning videos, is that they do get a bit randy, they do get a bit all over the place. It is me exploring thoughts. And so really I wanted to talk about HBM memory, if it could be used with compression, how they could get away at the manufacturer level with lesser chips, and it could have a really unimpressive sounding part coming to market with, like, say, 4 gig in a portable, plus maybe some ancillary like 512 megabytes for menus and whatnot. But a future console could have, as low as 4 or 8, whatever they can actually manufacture up to that won't affect the price, or allow them to make the price reasonable. But I guess it'll just depend on how performant they can get the compression down. If they can get a 4-time level compression such they're backwards compatible on a PS6 with only 4 gig of RAM, they'll fly that one under the radar, won't they? Everyone will think, oh, they're about to launch something like an Xbox Series S. This isn't the PlayStation 6, this is the PlayStation 5C, the cut down one for everyone. And then everyone realises afterwards, oh shit, it's using some future AMD GPU as well. Oh shit, it turns out using compression they've managed to make 4 gigabytes of RAM equal to 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it's actually backwards compatible with all of the full fat